I love watercolor. It's so fresh and it's so spontaneous and it's so exciting. I believe very strongly that we're all born to create, and I think that you can do it if you think you can. It takes desire, it takes determination, and it takes practice. But even more important when it comes to watercolor, it takes learning the basic skills and understanding the fundamental principles. And that's what I want to show you in this video. Now let's get to the paint. Do you remember praying watercolors? I did my first watercolor in 1941 with a set of praying watercolors, and I have that painting even today. There was a big problem with these paints, though. Do you remember this when you were a kid? You'd get this little brush out that's kind of a funny little brush that came with it, and then you'd wet your paints, and you'd get in here and you'd scrub and you'd scrub and you'd scrub, and you'd try to put a little paint on that paper, and nothing happened. It was just pastel. It was very disappointing. That isn't the kind of paint that we use when we're painting in watercolors today. This is what children use in school. But what we use are called tube watercolors. We've got all kinds of tube watercolors that we can call on. You'll find them in the stores, hundreds of different colors, different brands, and it's very exciting to play with the colors and find out what's out there. But it's also very confusing. Now, when you're buying your paints, it's more economical to buy a larger tube of paint. But this is the tube that most students will opt for. Now, you've got a choice between students and artist grades of watercolor. What does that mean exactly? A student grade of watercolor generally has additives in it. And these additives have a tendency to make the paints a little more dense and a little bit opaque. And since we're working with a medium called transparent watercolor, we really prefer to have our paints be very transparent. So I do not recommend that even beginners start with the student grades of watercolors. Another problem with the student grades of watercolor is that they are sometimes synthetic colors, and this means that the colors may not be true. Now let's look at my chart here, and I'll show you what I mean by that. In these two columns, we have colors that are made by different manufacturers, and each one of these colors has the same name, so that all of the colors in this column are called cobalt blue, and yet they're quite different. And this is the thing that is so disturbing about going from artist watercolors to synthetic watercolors. You will find that a very beautiful artist cobalt blue here is a much stronger, not nearly so delicate, pleasing color. Cobalt blue is one of my favorite colors, and I call it my benchmark color. If the color doesn't look like this or this or this, then I don't consider it to be cobalt blue. And none of these meet my specifications for the colors through here. And the same thing is true of this burnt sienna. As you can see, there's a great variety. Some of the student grades are quite weak, and others are extremely strong because they're synthetic colors. Another thing that you can see when you put the color over a black line like this is just how transparent that color is. One of the things that you want to watch for between the student grades and the artist colors is the clarity of the color. You'll find that the colors that are not as well made, the student grades of colors, will not be as clear in their washes. I call that the clarity of the wash. And here I have a wash that has the streaks in it that came from a student grade of watercolor, and here is a nice, clean, clear wash that came from an artist grade of watercolor. So there are very good reasons why you need to pay just a little bit more for good quality materials, because then you have your quality materials are helping you to achieve your goals in your watercolor. Another quality that you want to look for in your paints is a quality called tinting strength, and this is the power of the color to influence a mixture. As you can see, I've got three columns here. These are not the same paints. They are the same colors, the same manufacturer, but each one of these is a different pigment within the manufacturer's line. This group of colors has a very weak tinting strength. They're very delicate, beautiful colors. They make wonderful washes and pastel type effects in a painting. These have average tinting strength, and these are extremely powerful. Now what this means is that when you're mixing colors from any of this selection of colors, you want to be careful that you don't get the colors in this column mixed with the colors in this column, because it takes far too much of the color to influence the mixture here, and these will completely overpower your colors. Other factors to consider in your paint are things that really make a big difference to each individual when they're selecting their colors. For example, we have a quality called the staining or the non-staining quality of the color. Here we have a color called cerulean blue, and in painting this large section of cerulean blue, I covered one side of it and then I sponged off the other side, and as you can see, I was able to get back almost to the white paper. Here I've taken a color called Windsor blue or phthalo blue. This color actually stains the fibers of the paper. Now, the staining colors are the ones that most beginners like to stay away from, because if you need to do some corrections in your watercolor painting, you will find that this color won't come out and you cannot get back to your white paper. Now, there's an interesting quality called a spreading quality of watercolor paints, a settling or a spreading quality, and here are 3 different examples of that. This color, cerulean blue, when placed on a 2-inch square, just a dot of it, will stay where you put it. When you put cadmium orange in the same size wet space on a piece of watercolor paper, it spreads and it crawls and it jumps and it runs and it keeps going, and it doesn't know when to stop. I always tell my students in my class, cadmium orange will eat your studio if you let it. Down here we have a color called Windsor red, and there are many colors like this that when you put the little dot of color, most of the color stays in the center, but a little bit of it blossoms outward, and it spreads quite nicely. Now, the interesting thing about this is that you can combine a settling quality like this and a spreading quality like this, and you can get a halo around a wash. Here's a color called French ultramarine, and there are a number of colors like this that have a property that I call granulation. You can see very fine granules in this wash. It doesn't mean that the paint is improperly ground. It simply means that the granules settle in the valleys of the paper and make a very interesting color effect. I like to use this to create density in clouds and to give me an effect of fog, something that where I want sort of a hazy look. Now, I've done a lot of studies with my paints, and of course one of my books is Exploring Color, but this little book shows how the paints look in various ways that I work with the paints. Now, it takes a long time for you to get to the point where you can actually work with the colors in this way, but this is one of the ways that you can work with your colors, learn more about the paints, and through the process make better paintings. Here's another example of the tinting strength, and here's the settling and the spreading. So these are the kinds of things that I've done through the years to teach me more about how to work with my watercolor paints. In this little video, what I've tried to do is give you an idea of what the most basic things are that you need to know to paint in watercolor. These are the books that I've published within the last few years. It's important for you to learn the basics, and what you do in order to accomplish this is you read the books, you take classes, and most important, you practice and you believe in yourselves.